It's kind of wild looking back, isn't it? The early days of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
had these seemingly common sense observations about China's actions, the lockdowns, but then the claims of success, the hospitals popping up.
Right. And the reaction here, even in America, was, well, intense.
Intense is a good word. People trying to criticize or just ask questions were
Mhm.
facing real pushback, attempts to, like, shut them down.
And then, almost overnight, it felt like the whole story flipped.
Exactly.
Oh.
The lab leak idea. First, it's a conspiracy theory, totally off limits. Now, major news outlets, government folks, they're saying, yeah, maybe. It's plausible.
It really does make you wonder, doesn't it? What else haven't we been allowed to, or maybe encouraged not to, talk about when it comes to China?
Well, that feeling, that sort of unease, it leads us perfectly into the material a listener shared.
Ah, yes. The book, Tom Cotton's 7 Things You Can't Say About China.
The title alone tells you we're heading into some challenging territory.
Definitely. The idea is we're exploring some potentially unspeakable things, as the author frames it. Things maybe people shy away from.
And it's important to note this isn't just like one guy's rant. The book tries to weave together history, what's happening now, and obviously the author's viewpoint as a U.S. senator.
Right. It covers a lot of ground. The nature of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, its global goals, its influence. It's pretty broad.
So, our mission today, for you listening, is to really pull out the core arguments from this book.
Yeah, we want to distill the main points, help you quickly get a handle on what the author is arguing is most important without getting bogged down in every single detail.
Okay, let's dive in. First big theme, China as an evil empire.
That phrase immediately jumps out, doesn't it? It echoes Ronald Reagan talking about the Soviet Union.
And the book points that out, right? That even Reagan's label got pushback initially.
It did. And the argument here, essentially, is that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is playing a similar role today. The focus of evil in the world, as the book puts it.
It's a strong claim. How does the book back that up?
Well, it points to history. Tiananmen Square, June 1989. That's presented as Exhibit A for the party's brutality and its absolute refusal to give up control.
The tank man image.
Exactly. That lone guy facing down the tanks. It's iconic. But the book stresses this wasn't just a one-off terrible event.
It argues it's part of a bigger picture.
Yeah, that the CCP has been building what it calls a dystopian police state for decades. Constant surveillance, controlling information, trying to shape how people think, not just what they do.
And if something or someone can't be controlled.
According to the book, they disappear, or they're destroyed. It's a pretty grim picture.
Yet the author notes that some elites, influential people, are hesitant to use labels like evil empire for China.
Right, and that reluctance itself is interesting. Maybe it speaks to, economic ties, political complexities, reasons why some might downplay these aspects.
Okay, let's shift to another idea the book tackles. This notion of moderate communists.
Ah, yes. The argument is basically, look at the history. From Mao Zedong right up to Xi Jinping today, the book says you see a consistent pattern of ruthless violence, not moderation.
It doesn't mince words about Mao, does it?
Not at all. Calls him the worst mass murderer in history, a really stark claim. And yet the party still kind of deifies him. His picture is everywhere.
Why? Why keep venerating him after all that?
The book suggests the party line is, criticizing Mao means criticizing the party's whole foundation, the nation itself almost.
Wow. And to hammer home this point about no real moderation, the book uses the one-child policy as a key example.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that policy was moderate. Forced abortions, forced sterilizations, hundreds of millions affected. It's staggering.
And this wasn't ancient history. It went on for nearly 40 years after Mao died.
Exactly. So the idea that the party somehow became fundamentally gentler after Mao, the book argues that policy directly contradicts it.
Even Deng Xiaoping's reforms, the opening up that many in the West saw as a move towards, capitalism and maybe freedom.
The book frames that differently. It argues Deng's reforms were a tactic, a strategy to save the Communist Party's power, not give it up, using, quote, capitalist tools in socialist hands.
And Deng was in charge during Tiananmen.
He was. He crushed the protests. The book says he welcomed Western money, sure, but made it crystal clear Western political ideas were not welcome.
And his successors, like Jiang Zemin, kept that going.
According to the book, yes, explicitly rejecting Western democracy, human rights models.
Which brings us to Xi Jinping.
Right. The book portrays Xi as consolidating power like no one since Mao. Purging rivals, building this huge personality cult, the Little Red App and all that.
Yeah.
getting rid of term limits so he can rule indefinitely, and really tightening the party's grip on businesses again. It all points away from moderation, according to the author.
This feeds into the next concept, China as a techno-totalitarian police state.
Yeah, that's a mouthful, but the idea is chilling. Technology hasn't led to more freedom. It's given the party tools for control Mao could only have dreamed of,
The scale of surveillance is hard to fathom.
isn't it? The book claims over half the world's surveillance cameras are in China. And they're not just cameras. They're hooked up to AI, facial recognition.
They're supposedly able to identify anyone in seconds.
That's the claim. 1.4 billion people. Constant monitoring everywhere. It's unprecedented.
And online, the digital world.
Even tighter control there, arguably. The Great Firewall. It's this massive censorship machine. Billions of posts deleted, the book says.
Banning words and phrases.
Yeah, like I don't agree or anything about Tiananmen Square. It just vanishes. And it goes further, monitoring private chats on apps like WeChat. Words can literally be deleted or changed in your messages without you knowing.
Wow. That's invasive.
Deeply. And this control extends to religion, too. The book talks about Christians in unregistered house churches.
People trying to practice their faith outside state control.
Exactly. And they face serious consequences. Fines, getting evicted, jail time, their churches even being demolished. There's one horrific story mentioned. A pastor and his wife allegedly buried alive when their church was bulldozed.
It's just awful.
It really highlights the extreme lengths the party will go to, according to this account.
The book also touches on a fundamental values clash here, right?
Yes, it contrasts the communist view, where a person's value is based on their usefulness to the party, with the American ideal, that everyone has inherent worth, equality under God and the law.
And that difference explains a lot of the repression.
The author argues it does. If the party is the ultimate authority, anything challenging it, like independent religious belief or groups seeking autonomy, is seen as illegitimate and needs to be crushed. That thinking, the book suggests, underlies the treatment of groups like Falun Gong, Tibetans, and the Uyghurs.
Let's look at Falun Gong. The book describes it as a spiritual practice.
Yeah, based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Values that don't exactly align with CCP ideology, the book points out.
And it grew really fast in the 90s.
Apparently so. Huge numbers, maybe even rivaling party membership at one point.
Which the party saw as a threat.
A direct ideological threat. That triggered a massive, brutal crackdown. And the book details something truly horrific associated with this.
The organ harvesting allegations.
Yes. Forced organ harvesting from Falun Gong prisoners. It poised to a huge spike in transplant surgeries in China right after the crackdown started. Kidney, heart, liver transplants, way up.
And the numbers cited are shocking.
Tens of thousands potentially killed for their organs just in the first decade. It's an incredibly disturbing claim of state-sponsored killing on an industrial scale.
Truly chilling. And the book says similar brutality extends to other groups, Tibet and Xinjiang.
Exactly. With Tibet, it recounts Mao calling religion poison, the crushing of the 1959 uprising, the Dalai Lama fleeing into exile,
And ongoing efforts to stamp out Tibetan culture.
destroying monasteries, limiting monks and nuns, imprisoning people. The book cites a really high estimated death toll by the late 70s, 1.2 million, which is huge for Tibet's population.
And even extreme protests like self-immolation.
Have just led to tighter control, especially under this official, Chen Quanguo, who brought in intense surveillance re-education camps, basically an inescapable net, as the book puts it.
But Xinjiang, that's presented as even more extreme.
It is. The book talks about concentration camps holding possibly millions of Uyghurs. The goal? Political brainwashing, destroying their culture.
The conditions described are
Horrific. Beatings, torture, starvation, rape, murder, forced sterilizations. The book highlights a drastic drop like halving of the Uyghur birth rate in just a couple of years. That strongly suggests a policy aiming at demographic change. Or worse.
And it's not just inside the camps?
No. Outside, it describes mosques destruction, confiscating Qurans, bulldozing cemeteries, using Uyghurs for forced labor across China, even harassing Uyghurs living abroad.
Xinjiang as a testing ground for this techno-totalitarianism.
Precisely. Wall-to-wall surveillance, collecting biometric data, AI flagging suspicious people, even QR codes on kitchen knives, and forcing people to denounce God and worship Xi Jinping. It's incredibly Orwellian stuff, according to this account.
This pattern of repression, the book argues, hit Hong Kong too.
Yeah, a place that was supposed to be different, right? One country, two systems. After the handover from Britain in '97, Deng Xiaoping promised autonomy.
But that eroded under Xi.
Steadily. It started, the book says, with things like the 2014 election rules that basically let Beijing vet candidates. That sparked the umbrella movement protests.
But the big hammer blow was the national security law in 2020.
That was the game changer, imposed directly by Beijing, bypassing Hong Kong's own legislature.
And it's incredibly broad.
Very. Criminalizing things like secession, subversion, terrorism, colluding with foreigners, terms so vague they can cover almost any dissent, life sentences possible. Plus, Beijing set up its own security forces in Hong Kong. It fundamentally changed the city's freedoms.
Okay, let's shift gears to the international stage. Rising Chinese aggression.
Right. The book contrasts Deng Xiaoping's strategy, hide your strength, bide your time, with Xi Jinping's approach.
Which it describes as more assertive. Reckless, even.
Yeah, a return to a kind of Maoist aggression, the book suggests. It gives examples. Leaning on countries economically back in 2009, harassing a U.S. Navy ship, the famously awkward reception for President Obama once.
And more recently, the border clash with India.
That deadly clash in the Himalayas in 2020. And she justifying it by talking about, ancient territory claims. It signals a much more muscular foreign policy.
And China isn't acting alone, the book says. It's building alliances.
It highlights what it calls an anti-American alignment. The no-limits partnership with Russia is the big one.
But also Iran, North Korea.
Strengthening ties there, supporting North Korea, and even making inroads in places like Cuba and Venezuela, traditionally closer to the U.S.
That alignment plus China's military buildup.
That's the combination that raises alarms in the book. China's military expansion is described as the world's largest, rapidly growing, conventional and nuclear.
Focusing on keeping the U.S. out of certain areas. Area denial.
Exactly. And having the world's largest stockpile of ballistic missiles. Plus, all the advanced tech. Cyber warfare, drones, anti-satellite weapons. The People's Liberation Army just has more ships, more missiles in some categories. A quantitative edge.
And the nuclear side is particularly worrying, according to the book.
Very. It calls the growth under Xi breathtaking. It contrasts Mao, who was kind of cavalier about nuclear war, with Deng, who had this minimum deterrence idea and a no first-use promise.
Xi's abandoning that.
That's the strong suggestion. The arsenal has reportedly doubled under him, set to double again, maybe hitting 1,000 warheads soon, possibly 1,500 later. And crucially, China isn't part of any arms control treaties.
And they're modernizing everything.
Yeah, their whole nuclear triad, land, sea, air delivery is getting newer, more advanced systems, maybe even ahead of the U.S. in some ways. Hypersonic missiles, for example.
And U.S. military leaders think they might drop the no first use policy.
The book notes that growing belief, yes, a very destabilizing prospect.
Okay, let's turn to the economy. The book calls it economic world war.
Pretty blunt language. It sums up China's strategy as lie, cheat, and steal.
Harsh.
It is. It points to China's massive GDP growth since joining the WTO in 2001, but argues a lot of that gain came directly at America's expense. Lost manufacturing jobs, lower wages, flooding the market with the cheap, sometimes shoddy goods.
Currency manipulation is mentioned as a key tool.
A major one. Keeping the yuan undervalued gives Chinese exports an unfair price advantage. The book links this directly to the huge U.S. trade deficit with China, trillions of dollars over the years.
It's not just currency, though. The state's role in the economy.
Crucial. State-owned enterprises dominate key sectors. Steel, cement, ships, rare earths. They can operate in ways private companies can't, selling below cost, massive state subsidies. It's not a level playing field.
And local governments add another layer of unfair competition, the mayor economy.
Right. Cutthroat competition between regions in China to attract investment, often at the expense of foreign firms' interests or rights.
Then there's the gangster economics part, IP theft.
A huge focus. Intellectual property theft, costing the U.S. hundreds of billions a year, the book claims. China identified as the #1 culprit. Cyber theft, like massive hacking operations, but also old-school spying.
Stealing tech from universities, companies.
Numerous examples cited. And the Chinese legal system often makes it really hard for foreign companies to fight back and protect their inventions.
What about other tactics? Economic pressure.
Definitely. Using access to their huge market as leverage. Controlling exports of critical materials, we saw that with rare earths, germanium, gallium, graphite recently, and debt traps through the Belt and Road Initiative, lending money for big infrastructure projects that countries maybe can't repay, giving China leverage.
The book also details how specific U.S. industries got hit hard. Solar, wind, EVs.
Yeah, and argues unfair practices like massive subsidies, forcing U.S. companies to hand over technology to get market access, and dumping products below cost, basically decimated American competitors in those key green tech sectors.
This all paints a picture of, well, infiltration seems like the next logical step. Infiltration of American society.
That's the argument. Using greed and fear to influence American elites, business leaders, academics, Hollywood sports figures.
Hollywood gets specific examples.
Lots of them.
Yeah.
Studios changing scripts, cutting scenes, digitally altering villains, all to avoid offending Beijing and keep access to that massive Chinese box office. Disney and Kundun, MGM remaking Red Dawn, World War Z, Doctor Strange.
The Mulan filming controversy in Xinjiang.
Right, and celebrities feeling pressured to apologize publicly if they say something China doesn't like John Cena calling Taiwan a country. It's described as preemptive obedience.
Sports, too. The NBA situation.
That was a big one. Daryl Morey tweets support for Hong Kong protesters.
Yeah.
Immediate, massive backlash from China. The NBA's response looked very much like appeasement to many critics. Comments by stars like LeBron James, Steve Kerr.
And the NBA had a training center in Xinjiang,
Which they only closed after reports of abuses came out. Plus, China has big money deals with the NFL, MLB, ESPN. The financial leverage is significant.
How about news media?
Intimidation tactics, basically.
Yeah.
Expelling journalists, denying visas, trying to control the flow of information about China coming out to the world, especially after the Hong Kong crackdown.
And universities, how does the influence work there?
The book points to a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Dependence on tuition fees from large numbers of Chinese students, big donations often with strings attached, like to the Sci Center at Yale mentioned, research contracts with Chinese tech giants like Huawei.
And talent recruitment programs.
Like the 1,000 Talents Plan, which the FBI has warned is used for economic espionage, stealing technology. Plus alleged control over Chinese student associations on campus to push pro-CCP views and silence critics.
Tech companies get called out, too, for helping build China's surveillance state.
Yes. Cisco, Microsoft, IBM, Intel, NVIDIA. Accused of providing technology. Google's controversial Project Dragonfly plan to create a censored search engine for China. Apple removing apps Beijing doesn't like from its App Store.
Even helping silence dissent outside China.
Companies like LinkedIn and Zoom have faced criticism for censoring content or accounts critical of the CCP, even for users outside China.
And finally, corporate complicity and potential slave labor.
Yeah, the book names big companies like Nike, Coca-Cola, Apple that reportedly lobbied against U.S. laws designed to block imports made with forced Uyghur labor from Xinjiang.
Which brings us to infiltration of the U.S. government.
This is maybe the most alarming part for many readers. The book argues infiltration happens at all levels: military, federal, state, local, espionage, influence campaigns, the new China lobby.
Military espionage
But
examples.
several are cited. Recruiting service members for cash to get classified info. Hiring retired U.S. pilots to train Chinese pilots. Major defense contractors like Hughes, Northrop Grumman, Boeing having military secrets stolen over the years.
Using things like LinkedIn to find targets.
Yes, part of that 1,000 grains of sand approach, gathering lots of small pieces of information. And buying land near sensitive military bases like in North Dakota and Texas, that raises red flags.
The spy balloon.
That flew right over Malmstrom Air Force Base, a nuclear missile site, a very visible example.
Okay, what about Washington, D.C., the swamp?
The argument is China essentially buys off politicians and officials through lobbying and other means. The book talks about the new China lobby, distinct from the old pro-Taiwan lobby. This new one is heavily influenced by corporations doing business in China and pushes for engagement, often downplaying risks or human rights issues.
Former officials becoming lobbyists for Chinese companies.
Examples like former Senators Vitter and Boxer, Rep. Royce, Senator Lieberman are given. The book also mentions the Biden family's business dealings involving China and suggests a broader pattern of cultivating ties with powerful political families, like the Bushes historically.
And this influence extends down to state and local levels.
Yes. The book calls state and local politics a farm team for Beijing. Easier targets may be to gain influence or extract economic deals. The case of Christine Fang, the alleged spy who got close to politicians like Eric Swalwell and some mayors, is presented as evidence.
Weaponizing things like sister city programs.
Using them for propaganda, gaining access, getting favorable deals. San Francisco, Detroit, Michigan, under different governors, are cited as examples where these ties were allegedly leveraged by China.
Gavin Newsom's trip to China gets mentioned.
His visit and hosting Xi Jinping in California are framed as overly conciliatory. Arkansas's pursuit of Chinese investment and the controversial Sun paper mill deal are also detailed as examples of state officials potentially being influenced.
And TikTok, big national security concern.
Huge. Owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company subject to CCP control. The massive data collection on users, mostly American teens. The algorithm potential for manipulation, pushing propaganda. Its role as a news source for many young people.
There's bipartisan effort to force a sale.
Yes. But TikTok is fighting it hard. The book frames it as a potential weapon China could use in a conflict, spreading disinformation or sowing division.
And finally, influencing U.S. education directly.
Grants to schools, mini Confucius institutes, sending teachers, shaping curriculum like the AP Chinese test via the College Board, huge numbers of students, even buying U.S. private schools outright in some cases. It's presented as a multi-pronged effort to shape how Americans learn about and perceive China.
So after laying all this out, the book reaches a pretty stark conclusion: China could win.
Yeah, that's the bottom line warning. And the key, according to the author, is Taiwan.
Taking Taiwan is the linchpin for China achieving global dominance.
That's the argument. It's not just about settling a historical score, it's strategically vital, militarily and economically.
What would happen if China did invade Taiwan successfully? The economic fallout?
Catastrophic, the book predicts. Bloomberg Economics estimated $10 trillion wiped off the global economy. The U.S. hit harder than the 2008 recession. Stock market crash, huge job losses, shortages, prices soaring, critical medicines cut off.
And the semiconductor impact. TSMC is based in Taiwan.
Exactly. That would cripple industries worldwide. Cars, electronics, everything that uses advanced chips.
Yeah.
But the book argues the long-term geopolitical damage would be even worse.
Like what?
U.S. alliances in Asia could crumble. Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia lose faith in U.S. security guarantees. China dominates the Pacific, controls the South China Sea completely. Southeast Asia falls into its orbit. India might feel pressured to appease China. China starts looking for military bases globally. Even Europe might become less willing to stand with the U.S.
And the long-term economic consequences for the U.S.
Stagnation and decline, potentially. China doubles down on its unfair economic practices without fear of consequences. Other countries might feel forced to align with China economically. The U.S. gets cut off from East Asia's dynamism. The U.S. dollar's role as the world's reserve currency gets undermined, leading to higher borrowing costs, lower asset values, weakening sanctions as a foreign policy tool.
So not necessarily a direct invasion of the U.S. mainland.
Unlikely because of nuclear weapons, the book concedes, but a gradual hollowing out of American power and influence, becoming irrelevant on the world stage. It quotes Henry Kissinger's warning about the U.S. becoming an island off the coast of the world.
It's a sobering picture. The stakes couldn't be higher, really. Preserve America's standing or face decline.
That's the choice the book lays out. But it doesn't just end there, on that bleak note.
No, it tries to shift towards empowerment, right? Saying that while you, the listener, can't make policy directly,
Your actions, combined with others, can make a difference. Collective action matters.
so it offers some practical steps. 7 things people can do.
Exactly. 7 things you can do in your daily life to help America beat China, as the book titles it.
Okay, what are they?
1. Stay informed. Actually learn about the CCP, what it does.
2, talk about it. Inform your friends, family, especially kids. Don't shy away from the topic.
3. Make China a factor when you vote. Federal, state, local elections. Hold politicians accountable on this issue.
4, get kids and yourself off Chinese apps if possible. TikTok, Temu, Shein, WeChat, Alipay. Be mindful of the data and influence risks.
5. Boycotts made in China when you can. And avoid celebrities or companies that seem to be, kowtowing to Beijing.
6, try to buy American or from allied countries. Support our own economy and those of our friends.
And 7. Pray. Pray for the Chinese people who suffer under the regime and pray for peace.
It ends on a note of, well, maybe hope or resolve.
Yeah, emphasizing that America's real strength is its people. And if people are informed and engaged, the book suggests America can prevail in this challenge. It's a reminder that individual choices collectively really do shape the future.